In the bustling heart of Manhattan, on the 17th of December 2014, the wind carried the scent of snow as people rushed past Joe's Diner, a modest eatery tucked away on 7th Avenue. Inside, the hum of chatter and clinking dishes filled the air. Amid the chaos, Emily Carter, a 26-year-old waitress with caramel-colored hair and a smile that could brighten the darkest day, carried trays and refilled coffee cups with practiced ease. Emily wasn't just a waitress, she was a dreamer. Every shift was a step closer to saving for art school. That particular evening, as the city braced for a storm, a frail man in tattered clothes shuffled into the diner. His hollow eyes scanned the room nervously. Customers averted their gazes, but Emily noticed him. Her heart twisted. "Sir," she said softly, "are you hungry?" The man hesitated before nodding, his voice barely a whisper. I haven't eaten in 2 days." Without waiting for approval, Emily led him to a booth near the heater. She placed a steaming plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans in front of him. "Eat, please," she urged. The man's hands trembled as he picked up the fork. Tears welled in his eyes, and he managed a broken, "Thank you." But as Emily walked back to the counter, her boss, Mr. Daniels, a wiry man with sharp features, stormed out of the kitchen. His voice boomed, silencing the diner. "Emily, what do you think you're doing?" She stood her ground, though her heart pounded. "He's hungry, Mr. Daniels. He needed a meal." "You think this is a charity?" he snapped. "That meal's coming out of your paycheck. In fact," his lips curled into a cruel smirk, "you're fired. Pack your things." Stunned silence fell over the room. Emily's cheeks burned with humiliation as she untied her apron. The homeless man stood, looking guilt-stricken. "Miss, I didn't mean to cause trouble. I'll leave." "No," Emily said firmly, cutting him off. "You finish your meal." She grabbed her coat, head held high, and walked out into the cold night. The biting wind stung her face, and tears threatened to spill, but she refused to let them fall. She sat on a nearby bench, clutching her bag, wondering how she'd explain this to her roommate, or how she'd make rent. 30 minutes passed. Snowflakes began to drift from the sky. Emily was lost in thought when a black SUV pulled up in front of the diner. The door opened, and out stepped none other than Keanu Reeves. He was dressed simply, in a black coat and jeans, his signature kind smile lighting up his face. He walked into the diner, scanning the room as if looking for someone. What happened next would change Emily's life forever. Keanu Reeves stepped into the diner, his presence commanding attention yet radiating humility. The room fell silent, every pair of eyes fixated on him. He paused, his gaze sweeping the space until it landed on the frail man still sitting at the corner booth, nervously picking at the remnants of his meal. "Excuse me." Keanu's deep, steady voice carried across the diner as he approached the man. "Mind if I sit here?" The man blinked, his weathered face a mix of shock and confusion. Sure, I guess," he stammered, clutching his worn coat closer. Keanu slid into the booth across from him and gestured to the empty plate. "That meal, was it good?" Tears filled the man's eyes as he nodded. "It was the first warm food I've had in days," he whispered. "A kind waitress gave it to me, but she got fired because of me." Keanu's brows furrowed. "She was fired?" His tone carried disbelief, but beneath it, a spark of anger. "Where is she now?" The man hesitated, his hands trembling as he recounted what little he knew. "She left. I didn't even catch her name. She seemed kind, young. I didn't mean for her to lose her job." Keanu stood abruptly, his jaw tightening. "Stay here," he said, then turned to Mr. Daniels, who was watching the scene unfold from behind the counter, his face pale and nervous. "You're the manager?" Keanu asked, his voice sharp but calm. Mr. Daniels stammered. "Why, yes, I am. Is there a problem, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu's dark eyes narrowed. "I heard you fired a waitress tonight for showing compassion. That true?" "Well, she broke the rules, gave away food for free," Mr. Daniels mumbled, his voice faltering. Keanu leaned in, his voice dropping but no less powerful. You run a business, I get it. But firing someone for helping another human being? That's not just heartless, it's bad business. Mr. Daniels opened his mouth to reply, but Keanu raised a hand, silencing him. You'll want to rethink that decision. Trust me. The air in the diner was heavy with tension as Keanu walked out, leaving Mr. Daniels visibly shaken. Outside, the snow had begun to fall more heavily, blanketing the city in white. Keanu scanned the street until he spotted her. Emily was sitting on the bench, her head bowed, her breath visible in the cold air. She clutched her coat tightly, her eyes distant and glistening with unshed tears. Keanu approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. Excuse me, he said gently. Emily looked up, her red-rimmed eyes widening in disbelief. You're Keanu Reeves. He smiled softly, kneeling in front of her to meet her gaze. And you must be the kind waitress everyone's talking about. Her lips parted in shock. How do you? I was inside, he explained. Heard what happened. You didn't deserve that. Emily shook her head, her voice cracking. I just wanted to help. I didn't know it would cost me my job. Keanu's eyes softened, his heart aching for the young woman before him. Sometimes doing the right thing costs more than it should, he said, his tone filled with quiet conviction. Quietly but firmly, he added, It doesn't mean you were wrong. Tears spilled over her cheeks, and she quickly wiped them away. I don't even know why you're talking to me, she whispered. I'm nobody. Keanu reached out gently, placing a hand over hers. You're not nobody. You're someone who chose kindness when it wasn't easy. That makes you extraordinary. Emily stared at him, her heart pounding, unsure if this was real or some strange dream. Keanu stood, pulling out his phone. Do you have a place to stay tonight? She nodded slowly. I have a roommate, but I don't know how I'll pay rent now. He smiled faintly, dialing a number. Let's take it one step at a time. First, let me make a call. As he stepped aside, speaking softly into the phone, Emily watched him, her mind racing. This man, this world-famous actor, was standing here, helping her, a complete stranger. For the first time that night, she felt a flicker of hope. When Keanu returned, his smile was brighter. All right, he said. We've got something sorted out. But first, how about I walk you home? Emily hesitated, then nodded. As they walked through the snowy streets of Manhattan, she felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, disbelief. And as the night unfolded, Emily couldn't help but wonder, why had Keanu Reeves shown up in her life? Was it pure coincidence, or was there something more at play? As they walked through the softly falling snow, the silence between them was both comforting and heavy. Emily clutched her coat tighter, her breath visible in the cold night air. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. Keanu Reeves, a man she had only ever seen on the silver screen, was walking beside her as though it were the most natural thing in the world. You know, he began, breaking the silence. Kindness like yours, it's rare. Most people would have looked away. Emily glanced at him, her voice still shaky. I didn't do anything special. He was hungry. Anyone would have done the same. Keanu shook his head, his expression thoughtful. You'd be surprised how often people ignore what's right in front of them. The world could use more people like you. His words warmed her, but guilt gnawed at her heart. It's not enough, she said quietly. He's still out there, and now I've lost my job. I couldn't even help properly. Keanu stopped walking, turning to face her. His gaze was steady, intense. Don't ever think that what you did wasn't enough. You gave that man hope. Sometimes, that's all someone needs to keep going. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat, her emotions overwhelming her. She hadn't cried in front of anyone since she was a child, but here she was, standing on a snowy Manhattan sidewalk, tears streaming down her face as a stranger, a movie star, no less, offered her comfort. Keanu reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a tissue and handing it to her. "Here," he said softly. "You're allowed to feel. It's okay." She took the tissue, dabbing her eyes as she tried to compose herself. "I don't even know why you're helping me," she admitted. "I'm just nobody." His brow furrowed, a shadow of sadness crossing his face. "I used to think the same thing about myself," he said, his voice low. "There were times in my life when I felt invisible, like I didn't matter. But people, strangers, showed me kindness when I needed it most. That's what keeps me going. So if I can do that for someone else, even in a small way, I will." Emily looked at him, her heartbreak easing a little at his honesty. "You felt that way? But you're Keanu Reeves." He smiled faintly, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "Fame doesn't shield you from loss or loneliness. It doesn't make you immune to pain. I've lost people I love deeply, my best friend, my partner, my child. And in those moments, I would have given anything for someone to remind me that I wasn't alone." Her breath hitched at his words, the raw emotion in them cutting through her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He nodded, his gaze distant for a moment before refocusing on her. "Life can be unbearably hard sometimes, Emily. But the kindness we show each other, that's what makes it bearable. That's what matters." They continued walking, the quiet between them now filled with unspoken understanding. As they neared her apartment, Emily felt a pang of regret that the night was coming to an end. "Here," she said, stopping in front of a modest brick building. "This is me." Keanu looked up at the building, then back at her. "It's been a long night," he said, his voice gentle, "but it's far from over." Emily frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He pulled a card from his pocket, handing it to her. "Tomorrow, I want you to meet someone. A friend of mine who runs a non-profit. They help people like the man you fed tonight, people who need a second chance. And they're always looking for compassionate people like you to help." She stared at the card, her fingers trembling as she held it. "Why are you doing this?" Keanu smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Because someone once did it for me. And because you deserve it." Emily didn't know what to say. She wanted to thank him, to hug him, to cry all over again, but words felt inadequate. Instead, she whispered, "You're amazing." He chuckled softly. "Not amazing. Just human. Like you." And with that, he turned, the snow swirling around him as he walked away, leaving her standing there with the faintest smile. On her lips was a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, belief. But as she climbed the steps to her apartment, clutching the card tightly, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far greater than she could imagine. Emily couldn't sleep that night. The small apartment she shared with her best friend, Lisa, was quiet except for the occasional creak of the radiator. She sat by the window, the glow of the city casting faint shadows on her face. In her hand she held the card Keanu had given her, staring at the name and number printed neatly on its surface. "Hope Horizons," she whispered, running her thumb over the embossed letters. A non-profit. An opportunity. But could she really trust it? Could she trust him? Her thoughts were interrupted when Lisa emerged from her room, her auburn hair messy from sleep. "Why are you still up?" Lisa asked, rubbing her eyes. Emily hesitated, unsure where to begin. "You're not going to believe what happened tonight." Lisa plopped down on the couch, pulling a blanket over her shoulders. "Try me." Emily recounted everything, the homeless man, her confrontation with Mr. Daniels, her unexpected firing, and then the part that seemed too surreal to be true, Keanu Reeves walking into her life. By the time she finished, Lisa's jaw was practically on the floor. "Wait, you're telling me that Keanu Reeves showed up at Joe's diner, talked to you, walked you home, and gave you a card?" Emily nodded, biting her lip. "I know how it sounds, but it happened. All of it." Lisa stared at her for a long moment, then burst into laughter. Only you could get fired and somehow have a Hollywood star show up to save the day." "It's not funny," Emily said, though a small smile tugged at her lips. I still don't know what to do. Lisa's expression softened. You call the number. You see where it leads. What's the worst that could happen? The next morning, Emily sat at her tiny kitchen table, the card in front of her, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Her stomach churned with nerves as she dialed the number. Hope Horizons. A warm voice answered on the other end. This is Anna speaking. How can I help you? Emily cleared her throat. Hi, my name is Emily Carter. I was referred to you by Keanu Reeves. There was a pause, and Emily's heart raced. What if this was all some elaborate joke? But then Anna's voice returned, cheerful and sincere. Yes, Keanu mentioned you. We'd love to meet you. Can you come by today? Emily agreed, and a few hours later, she found herself standing outside a modest building in Brooklyn. The sign above the door read, Hope Horizons, Building Second Chances. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. Anna, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, greeted her. You must be Emily. Keanu told us what happened last night. He spoke very highly of you. Emily flushed, still struggling to comprehend that someone like him had even noticed her. I'm not sure what I'm doing here, she admitted. Anna led her to a small office and gestured for her to sit. Keanu believes in second chances, and so do we. He thought you might want to help others while figuring out your next step. We run programs for the homeless, job training, and outreach. With your compassion, you'd be a perfect fit. Emily felt a flicker of hope, but doubt quickly crept in. I'm not qualified for this, she said softly. I'm just a waitress. Anna smiled gently. From what I hear, you're much more than that. You stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. That's rare. For the first time in days, Emily felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as lost as she thought. Weeks turned into months, and Emily threw herself into her work at Hope Horizons. She coordinated meal programs, connected with local shelters, and even started an art therapy workshop, using her passion for painting to help others express themselves. But no matter how busy she was, Keanu lingered in her thoughts. He hadn't contacted her since that night, and part of her wondered if she'd imagined the quiet connection they'd shared. One rainy evening, as she cleaned up after a workshop, the door to the center opened. She turned, expecting one of the volunteers, but her breath caught. There he was, Keanu Reeves, standing in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, his dark eyes warm and familiar. I heard you've been doing amazing things, he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Emily's heart raced, and for a moment she couldn't find her voice. Why are you here? He stepped closer, his gaze steady. I wanted to see for myself. And I wanted to thank you. She blinked, confused. Thank me? For what? For reminding me why kindness matters, he said simply. For proving that even in a world as harsh as this, there are people who care. You've done more than you realize, Emily. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she didn't try to hide them. I should be thanking you, she whispered. Keanu shook his head, his expression earnest. You've given hope to so many people here, including me. Emily stood frozen, Keanu's words echoing in her mind. The rain outside seemed to soften, as if the world itself had paused to listen. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. You gave me a reason to believe in myself again, she finally managed, her voice trembling. When I thought I had nothing left, you showed me that kindness still mattered. Keanu smiled gently, his gaze unwavering. You've done more than that, Emily. Look around this place, these people. You've turned your pain into purpose. That's rare, and it's beautiful. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as his words sank in. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Emily truly believed she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her cheeks flushed as she whispered, I never thought someone like you would notice someone like me. He stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. You're wrong. You're extraordinary, Emily. You just needed someone to remind you. For a moment, silence enveloped them, the room filled only with the faint hum of rain and the distant chatter of volunteers. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked, her hands trembling as she took it. "Open it," he encouraged. She carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a sketchbook, its leather cover soft and warm in her hands. Inside, on the first page, was a note written in Keanu's elegant handwriting. Asterisk for the artist who paints with kindness. Never stop creating, asterisk. Her breath caught, overwhelmed by the gesture. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Keanu replied. "Just promise me one thing, keep being you." At that moment, something shifted in Emily's heart. The weight she'd carried for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a feeling she hadn't felt in years: hope. As Keanu turned to leave, she called after him. "Will I see you again?" He paused at the door, glancing back with a smile that was equal parts mystery and warmth. "I have a feeling our paths will cross again." And with that, he disappeared into the rain, leaving Emily clutching the sketchbook to her chest, her heart full of gratitude, wonder, and the quiet realization that her story was far from over.